Great. I'm so glad to be here today, especially because I love DevOps Days events. I've spoken in person at the Stockholm and Geneva DevOps Days, and Warsaw's been on my list. My mother's side of the family is from Szczecin, and but there was no Polish I could study in university. But I learned Russian, which was going to help me when I eventually learned Polish. But I'm getting off track here. My name's Heidi Araya. I'm an innovation product manager with Adaptivist. And over the next 30 minutes or so, I'll be sharing a story of an approach I have been working on to help companies transition to Agile successfully. And it's called the Four Facets of Agility. So why am I here today? Showing up talking to you about Agile and Agile transformations. Well, I was lucky enough to be hired as a government contractor at NASA to rescue a waterfall project that had delivered vaporware. And we used Scrum to regain trust with the customer. That app was in production for almost 8 years with barely any defects before finally being retired. For the past 10 years since then, I've been heavily involved in helping many companies, both as employee and consultant, adopt and scale Agile ways of working. These companies range from a small startup that grew rapidly from 30 to 220 people to 100-year-old enterprises with over 200 employees worldwide and companies in between, financial services, cybersecurity, et cetera. So I'm now working as innovation product manager, which means I test new ideas and products with customers. I'll talk about a few of those things during this talk. And I do what I do so that I can help others break free from organizational angst and come to work feeling happy and fulfilled every day. As you can imagine, in my journey from company to company, each of them was very different, but they all had one thing in common. In every single case, people in these companies had an incomplete picture of what it would take to be agile, and they didn't know that they were missing these key components for success. Many of them had called in consultants who rigidly imposed frameworks upon existing structures, or they thought they could do it all on their own without coaches, scrum masters, or any sort of guiding vision of how they would transition to agile, seeing it simply as a team level process change. Indeed, many of these companies already had so-called agile teams and practices using these Scrum or Kanban or a mix of other practices. But upon closer inspection, the teams didn't have the tools or the support they needed. And in some cases, leadership wouldn't support more autonomous teams. So this is my journey. When I was working with teams, I discovered unhappy people being forced to perform rote practices as individuals instead of being able to work as a team to produce something amazing together. People were having less and less autonomy, all because management wants to be able to easily measure team outputs instead of outcomes. In fact, they don't know what they should be measuring, so oftentimes just come up with something silly and dangerous, like points per developer, because they need to know what people are doing instead of focusing on whether customers like what has been done or not. People don't have time to improve their ways of working. Even last week, I heard, we're struggling. We're too busy to send this person to your workshop for 2 days. The fact is that people don't understand the changes that need to happen in their organization to encourage agility. And this is causing massive disengagement in workplaces today. The slide might not be a shock to you, especially for those of you who have worked in these kinds of organizations. So this is my approach, and hopefully it's going to help you as it's been helping me and us at Adaptivist. As I was thinking through these challenges I encountered over the years, thinking, why is it no one understands the whole picture of what's going on, right? Why do so few people in leadership see the value in Scrum Master, Agile coaches, good DevOps practices and principles? Why doesn't anyone consider the Agile mindset instead of viewing transformations as forcing others by command and control, which is the opposite of the Agile mindset? It hit me. They just don't know. Executives haven't experienced Agile firsthand like I have, working on the ground floor inside teams and all levels in organizations up to the C-suite, trying to guide Agile adoption. So how could I make this more meaningful when I'm speaking to people who haven't had the benefit of working at all levels or seeing the value at all levels in an organization? That's when I came up with this initial idea for expressing the different facets of agility. And as I evolved my thinking around these facets to accommodate what we were seeing in Adaptivist and how we were communicating with clients, it became the four facets of agility. People and leadership, complexity thinking, technical and cultural practices, and tools and automation. And guess what? The four facets resonate with people because now they have a way to express the various parts to focus on during an Agile transformation. For example, maybe the tools aspect is working well, but teams need to work more cohesively together. Or maybe leadership doesn't have this idea about Agile mindset, or perhaps teams need to understand how to write user stories or begin using automation. It is one thing to be relentless about continuously improving the processes by which work gets done. It's quite another, and every bit as necessary, to be relentless about continuously improving the people who do the work. And when you do that, it's called this deliberately developmental organization. And we realize that's our goal with these four facets. So we started approaching our clients and our proposals this way. And while no model is perfect, of course, finally we had an approach that was resonating with consultants and customers alike. And of course, this is not a framework for Agile at scale, right? It's just an idea of an approach. It's not meant to exclude any other patterns or practices. It's just a way to think about these various themes. So let's dig right in. The first facet I'm going to talk about is called complexity thinking. Complexity thinking is key for today's world. It has to do with creativity, critical thought, logic. It relates to our ability to do sophisticated thinking, such as understanding concepts, generating original ideas, and using new approaches to address sticky, new, unsolved, complex problems. People with strengths in complexity thinking might be good at deeply understanding ideas and concepts, seeing connections among information from various sources, demonstrating imagination, constructing some initial conclusion based on facts or evidence, taking risks with new ideas, and drawing inferences from limited information. But how does this relate to product development in organizations today? These complexity thinking frameworks are designed for the kind of complex and changing challenges and goals we're trying to achieve in today's complex, ambiguous world. We face new challenges in our work, like nonlinear relationships and emergence. Because of this, we cannot plan in detail or too far ahead. We must expect change, especially through inputs and feedback. And our processes themselves must be empirical so we can flex and adapt as we learn. That's the whole goal of complexity thinking. When we think about Scrum at scale, Scrum itself, Kanban, large-scale Scrum, the OODA loop, design thinking, or any framework or way of working that's built for inspecting and adapting, that falls into this complexity thinking category. When I was thinking of what we should call this category, other people were using the word processes for this facet, but the idea of complexity thinking really does embed the mindset of dealing with a much different world than we're used to, and the word process just didn't cover that. So when we meet with clients, they already have identified frameworks they want to use. The question to ask is, what problem will this framework solve for you? And what are your goals with using this framework? It's important to identify the challenges that they are facing now, as well as some goals, so they can identify how they know they are improving. After all, it's not about the framework. It's about how to adapt to complex and changing times and remain adaptable and resilient. And that leads to success as a business. The main problem that I've seen is that folks are not educated on the goals of these frameworks. What's problem it's solving for the organization, meaning the why, or not allowed to adapt anything in order to improve. Processes must serve the needs of the organization so that the company is able to survive and thrive in an uncertain world. I asked someone recently why their company wanted to do an agile transformation, and he actually said, "I don't know. I'm going to have to get back to you." So he asked. His boss didn't know either. It was just something the CIO said we had to do. So without knowing the why and communicating to everyone what will happen if we do not do this, it's a recipe for failure. So here's what we recommend. We work with clients to embed this complexity thinking mindset in their organizations through workshops and hands-on work, rather than just giving training like Scrum training, for example. We have found that working directly with people right in their day-to-day work and context is the best way to transfer knowledge of complexity thinking and work ourselves out of a job, which at the end of the day is our goal. We guide people to experience new ways of working and create a safe space to speak up and share their opinion, even widely differing opinions. This often feels messy or uncomfortable while the team is co-creating this meaning and new patterns of communication. But that's how a team transfers knowledge between each other to arrive at a common understanding. And by the end of the workshop, the team has something concrete they have bought into together to work on together. I had a recent client over a period of 16 hours in 4 remote sessions. We could see the conversation changing perceptibly. The group of people had turned into a much more cohesive team and appreciated differing opinions and even challenging old ways of doing things. By the end of the workshop, they were excited to take the next steps in their journey to agility that they had identified together as a team. And when leadership saw the workshop results, they were impressed with the team's ability to take on the challenge and improve their process. Leadership now trusts the team to do great work. We got feedback later on the team is taking ownership of their day-to-day work in a way that they had not done before. So the people and leadership facet, it's pretty involved also, as you will see now. We touched on people in every single part of these, right? These facets aren't like you can just take and separate each one of these, right? In this facet, I'm going to cover what we at Adaptivists, the research that we're doing for this people and leadership facet. But there are so many other aspects that could fit here, as you could imagine. So, few would disagree that a workplace is nothing without its people. But many organizations often end up focusing mostly on processes and tools instead of their people. In fact, everyone's been talking about the importance of an agile mindset for many years, but even as recently as May of 2020, this famous guy called Steve Denning, who's a well-known author and has the book called The Age of Agile, says, is it possible that we in the Agile community have been putting too much emphasis on such an undefined and ambiguous term as mindset? Well, we think the answer to this question is a resounding no. Why? Conventional ways of thinking won't help us handle today's complex and changing world. The things I told you about in the previous facet. If someone is going to change from this conventional thinking to an agile mindset, it's not just about training. We've seen that it's not enough to have someone go through a Scrum or SAFe class and think they've automatically got it, and now agile thinking is ingrained in their brain, even though they do have the all-important certificate. We've seen that doesn't work. So we got curious and we started to ask psychologists about mindset. What is mindset? Who better to ask? And we discovered the constructivist theory, which says that each person constructs their own meaning of the world and is influenced by this interaction of their prior knowledge and new events. And it turns out that people actually tend to move through different stages of psychological development throughout their lives. It's a journey of personal growth that people undertake. And this determines the way we view the world. Did that resonate with you? Because it did with me. I know I'm not the same person as I was when I was in my mid-20s or mid-30s or even last year. To uncover the stage of growth of an individual, the leadership development framework is one of the tools that we have been studying and testing in depth inside our company with our clients. Adults usually fall into this, what's called conventional and post-conventional ways of meaning making or action logic. The conventional way of meaning making is what most people fall into. It's this frame of mind that's concerned with control, measurement, prediction. If I had to correlate this with something, it's the belief that you can disassemble something into its component parts and put it back together again like a car or airplane. Oh, and predict when it will be done. And that means you can control situations and it's possible to predict outcomes. Post-conventional thinking is a bit more rare. To correlate with the previous example, it's your understanding that instead, situations are complex and interact in many different ways. You simply cannot disassemble and reassemble. It's in understanding that the world and the relationships in it are like living system, and most situations impossible to predict and control. And even more, you recognize your assumptions about the world. And guess what? We discovered that this post-conventional mindset or worldview looks very similar to an agile mindset. So now by understanding this individual's profile, we can guide them in their journey of personal growth. We do this via something that we call dialogue partnering. It's our way of guiding people to a new mindset and leaving behind what doesn't serve them. By the way, while I was creating this talk, I had someone ask me whether hiring only for agile-minded folks would create similarity bias. The answer is no. We can always benefit from an agile mindset, while we often cannot benefit from a rigid, fixed one. However you decide to approach the agile mindset in your organization, it's something that cannot be ignored. It's one thing for a person to have a particular mindset, but what about this organizational mindset? Researchers define organizational culture as the norms that characterize a work group or an organization. What does that mean? That means that the sum of all the mindsets in your company is its culture. An organization's mindset is the belief that a workforce has about the nature of people's ability, what they can do, what they're capable of. And research has found that some companies foster this fixed mindset culture of genius in which talent is worshipped. This kind of organizational culture asserts that employees either have talent or they don't when it comes to skills and learning abilities, and these organizations usually end up hiring a bunch of people who think they have all the answers. Other organizations, in contrast, foster what's called a culture of development. This kind of organizational culture asserts that people can grow and improve with effort, good strategies, and good mentoring, a chance to build a deliberately developmental environment. So in the next page, I'm going to show you what we do to understand the organization's mindset. These are the other tools we use to uncover how people interact and collaborate. One, we run what's called an organizational network analysis to understand the social network, which is the informal network in the workplace, and how folks interact. That informs us about what kinds of collaborations happening naturally or not. Does the part of the network you're in support experiments and learning? Does it support failure? Second, we uncover the group's motivational orientation. That is, if people have the right mindset but do not choose to act, it doesn't matter. We have to unlock what's called this autonomy. Self-determination theory says that the application of control will undermine an individual's ability to operate autonomously. Yet, many organizations are still built on this idea of command and control. So what we do is we measure how oriented individuals and groups are towards control or autonomy. And we find ways to trigger autonomy even if organizations are very heavily oriented towards control and compliance. And the third aspect, you may have heard of it, is called the Gallup poll. It measures employee engagement, which is related to organizational performance in a meaningful way. This research-backed Gallup poll 12-question survey finds organizations with higher engagement have much lower absenteeism, lower turnover, and measurably higher productivity, sales, and profitability. This Q12 survey measures the actionable issues for management, those predictive of attitudinal outcomes such as satisfaction, loyalty, pride, etc. We feel like this gives us a good picture of what's actually happening inside the organization so we can understand then how we can address this mindset, how the organization collaborates today. And then we work with them in workshops to evolve their interactions and ultimately the culture. There's a lot more I could say here, but it's time to go on to the next facet, which is technical and cultural practices. The delivery of valuable software, of course, relies on good technical and cultural practices. And at DevOps Days, I know that people here really appreciate that. So you might be wondering why I'm mixing the word technical with the word cultural here. Why didn't I put cultural practices under people and leadership? Simply stated, I believe these are practices that appear technical, but are large culture shifts at the same time. And people won't start doing them if they go against the organizational culture, those things I talked about before in this previous facet. Let me give you an example. Test-driven development and pair programming are both things that appear to be technical practice, but are actually big cultural shifts. Why should someone pair up with someone else if they're being rewarded for finishing tickets individually? Why should we do TDD if we're being pressured just to write code as fast as possible, to heck with quality? Even the idea of writing user stories is not only new for some people, but often runs contrary to the way people have viewed their work for many years. In many places, the culture or team structure simply won't allow teams to try new practices like behavior-driven development or test-driven development and other beneficial practices common to Agile. I can also say a lot of these things seem counterintuitive as well, right? The team mobs on something and you believe it'll get done faster and better than if one person works on it. That makes no sense to a lot of people. And extreme programming, or XP, has practices like collective code ownership, regular refactoring, et cetera. And many of these ideas are new to teams and leaders who are used to different ways of working. In fact, a VP once told me that if we allowed a tester to pair up front with a developer, that the developer would find a way to sneakily code around the tester. Either leadership doesn't understand or know that teams should be doing these practices, or simply assumes they'll learn it on the job. But I've rarely seen that to be true, especially in environments where teams are under pressure to deliver. Teams should be guided and supported to incorporate these practices in their day-to-day work. In the organization where we did actually compare stories that were pair tested and not pair tested, where a QA person paired with the developer before they started coding the story, the winner was clear. Stories that were pair tested had many fewer related defects, and all we had to do was add a flag in Jira validating that it had been pair tested. These kinds of experiments help validate assumptions on good practices. You can probably now see this people side of things is embedded in every single facet of what I'm talking about, and hopefully how this concept can be used to communicate with people that these might be new areas of focus for them. Also included in this area is the concept of teaming science, which is definitely a culture shift for many people in organizations. Many companies still use project-based teams or randomly move people from team to team based on reorgs and the priorities of the moment. The fact is, a great team can outperform by far a group of random people working on related work who don't act as a team. To be successful, teams must operate in emerging ecosystems amongst these complex situations and interactions. And the one in the first facet that I was telling you about, And they must understand factors that lead to team effectiveness, such as clarity of mission and purpose, boundaries, conflict management, and diversity of thought. It is not enough to gather a group of individuals together and think, if management leaves them alone, they'll figure it out on their own. There are no guarantees that team members won't stifle diversity of thought, handle conflict appropriately, or even be able to make healthy decisions. The people on the team often don't have the basic criteria for success to be a team. So with an appreciation for teaming science, we can determine how effectively teams are working together and whether they have the conditions to be successful. And I'm going to introduce you to those in this next slide. Team effectiveness researcher Richard Hackman found that 60% of team effectiveness comes from creating a strong initial team structure and design, 30% from an effective team launch, and 10% from ongoing team coaching. They're the three essentials, the first three things. To have a great team, you must have a real team, one that is bounded so that members know who is on the team and who is not. That might sound ridiculous, but I've known teams that they don't know who's on the team. They need to work together to accomplish their work, not as individuals. And they are stable in membership long enough to accomplish something meaningful together. And that might differ from team to team, right? But a team also has the right people with a range of perspectives needed to do the work and the skills, including teamwork skills, to bring those perspectives to their work. Teams need a purpose that engages their commitments and orients them in a shared direction as well. Next are the enablers, the last three things on the list: structure, coaching, and support. Every team benefits from a few elements of healthy structure, keeping the team small enough, tackling tasks together that make sense to be done as a team, and identifying a handful of norms about what they should and should not do when they work together. And well-designed teams actually benefit from an expert coach who can help the team grow individually and as a unit, and that's backed by research. Every team also operates in a larger context, and the systems and structures in that context, such as rewards and information, can either promote great teamwork, like I've been talking about, or create obstacles to excellent collaboration. There are several notable people who have written about teaming, and I'll share some of those in some resources later on. But whatever book you end up reading on teams, they are sharing a similar message. A great team does not come together by accident, and helping establish the right conditions can impact the team's success, effectiveness, and productivity in dramatic ways. So I haven't even scratched the surface on this idea of teaming and team science. But once you understand these other three facets, trust me, we're going to be much more successful at the last one, which is tools and automation. So let's talk about tools and automation, which after the other one seems like a smaller thing to talk about, but actually it's not really. Because tools are supposed to be enabling folks to do great work. But as you can imagine, tools and automation are implemented by humans who, well, they're people, and tooling and automation decisions are impacted by organizational culture and structure. You may have heard of something called Conway's Law. Organizations design systems that mirror their communication structure. That usually means handoffs and hierarchies, and many disparate tools driven by decisions in different parts of the hierarchy. Tools are here to help you work better, not to dictate the way you work. Often when we're called in, we find that tool configuration does not align with agile ways of working. And sadly, of course, when tools aren't set up right, collaboration is negatively impacted. And worse, the company has no way to find information it needs in order to make good decisions about strategy, priorities, or delivery. Tools should enable the pipeline of product delivery and improve the capacity for delivery. Think about it. An automation should have its own strategy, value stream, and roadmap. So looking at the tools holistically, and oddly, few companies look at it holistically, instead viewing them as maybe necessary evils that cost money. And of course, whatever you do with tooling, remember, we should be building in continuous improvement and learning in this area as well, right? One team we worked with had a team scrum board with 12 columns. After the engineer worked on it, it had peer code review, senior code review, 3 kinds of QA testing, and still they had so many production incidents. In fact, they were trying to hire a release manager to prevent more issues from reaching production. So each time something went wrong, they added more tools and processes without fixing the underlying issue, which was they had no automation in place. No surprise, adding more people to prevent stuff from going to production wasn't going to help the company improve its quality at all. So one approach to tools and automation is perform discovery sessions. Uncover the end-to-end value stream first. Uncover the end goals. For example, we had a client say, I want to speed up our release pipeline by 10 times. Uncover those underlying issues. For example, is it many production incidents? Then you can unlock new capabilities inside the organization by using the tools instead of looking at the tool like a solution. And metrics and measurement. Oftentimes we find that people don't even know what they should be measuring and how. They fail to ask what decision the data will drive. And the standard tooling doesn't allow for what are called flow metrics. These are metrics that measure the flow of value through the value stream to customers, instead focusing still only on portions of the work stream. We focus on flow metrics like cycle time, throughput, time and status, and look to improve key areas. After all, it doesn't matter how many story points you have in your sprint if it takes months to get something to a customer and you never close that feedback loop. Teams I have worked with over the years consistently avoid doing peer reviews or code reviews in a timely fashion. Sometimes when the code review had to happen outside the team, it could take weeks because of different priorities in each team. By adding a custom field for time and status and putting an SLA with a Slack notification, teams greatly improve their cycle times on work items. And it's not supposed to be viewed as beating someone up, but rather trying to improve our delivery time and improve as an organization together. So at the end of the day, the right metrics, tooling, and automation can help an organization along on its continuous learning journey if you know what to measure and why it's important for your organization. This is actually one of the pilots I'm doing, is called Healthy Metrics, where we start measuring these things inside clients and help them improve. Tools enable the automation of manual tasks, right? So where possible, you should be leveraging these to reduce unnecessary meetings that information the tool could answer. I was able to automate away a hated status reporting meeting by using Jira to pull data into Confluence with some custom fields. That meeting took almost 2 hours every Friday for many years, and it was hated by the 70 plus people who attended. I think when I try to categorize how much money we were wasting, it was almost $500,000 a year on that meeting. So when we automated this, that time was then repurposed to help remove impediments. It took a long time to get all the teams working in a way where we could pull this information automatically. But the even greater challenge was changing the culture around the status reporting meeting. You see, senior leadership for years would expect a status update and then criticize people who often had no power over what that status was or power to change it. The real change was to open up the reports page finally and only speak if you had a challenge you were facing that other people could help you with. And that really did end up driving culture change. So the advice here, take the time to reflect with your teams on ways to better utilize your time together, especially in today's distributed team environment. And what would happen if you automated away as many manual tasks and meetings as possible? And companies have one last challenge when it comes to tools, right? They usually have not considered how to show value delivery with existing tools. So no way to track program across teams and value delivery. So nobody really knows what the organization's working on. The work to gather the information is manual, and project and program managers sift through data and write reports which are out of date as soon as they're created. And even worse, as I mentioned before, management doesn't know what reports they want to see or how it will help them and their customers. It's a consistent issue I've seen in the past 10 years. They don't know where to start. I just heard of a CTO yesterday who was requiring people to track developer story points with targets for them at varying levels of contributor. So in a desperation to track something, they resort to complete fiction. I know product managers who would, again, duplicate all the team's work in spreadsheets for their own use. It was already in Jira, and the program managers would keep their own copy, and so much time wasted every week just to produce reports for teams. So find ways to configure the tools to be flexible and pragmatic and meet the needs of your organization, looking to track value across the teams and programs. This is another part of the pilot that I'm working on. Scaled Agile tooling, by the way, shouldn't force teams to work in a particular way just to make reporting easier. The tool should enable teams to work in a way that they see fit. To make it easier for reporting, a lot of companies mandate specific workflows which don't match the way teams are actually working. And what that does, it makes metrics useless and removes incentives for teams to explore new ways of working so they can deliver value more effectively and efficiently. So when you're setting up tools and exploring solutions, ask, who is the information for? What data do you want to see and why? What decisions will this information help drive? What's the downside or unintended consequence of tracking this? In previous organizations, people wanted to see work in progress, forecast end dates for epics and initiatives, and understand risks and changes. So I've been using Jira almost exclusively for the past 10 years, and we were able to accomplish this with various plugins. And we're looking to interview pilot customers for healthy metrics and program metrics solution. So it comes time to begin to wrap this up, right? The 4 facets of agility: complexity thinking, people and leadership, technical and cultural practices, and tools and automation have helped us think differently about agile transitions and speak with people about needs and challenges they face in various areas of the business. The 4 facets align teams on leadership on where we're at now and where we'd like to be. And through these workshops and discovery sessions, we identify clear next steps as a team instead of by executives dictating them from the top down. Work is done incrementally in a transparent way with purpose and defined outcomes. And because of that, proper tools and processes are introduced together with everyone's buy-in and input. And because of that, the culture begins to improve and everyone's aware of what's going on and where we're at now. This promotes more autonomy of teams, increases engagement, and bakes in the idea of complexity thinking. We're applying these learnings in our organization and in our clients' organizations to help them develop what is called this deliberately developmental environment that I've mentioned. We want folks to care about the work getting done, but also care about how it gets done and how folks interact with each other so we can unlock deep collaboration. And when we are able to develop this deliberately developmental environment, well-being increases, team performance increases, organizational performance increases, and people's experience at work is more congruent with their reality instead of being forced to continue to do things they know are not working. And hopefully, finally, the words continuous improvement and Agile aren't just empty words anymore. They mean something, and the company culture and work reflects that. So the journey to Agile and agility is never over, but I hope having these concepts will help your company focus on the right areas while you're learning. I'd love to hear whether or not this talk resonated with you. I really hope you enjoyed this talk, and that is it.